So here we are, we're back in the saddle, we're rooted to our microphones. I see Steve is ready to go. What we're talking about today?
Well, no, mate. No, I'm not my food. And that was basically me telling you that I've got a mouthful of food, and so I couldn't really tell you what we're about to kick off with.
Oh, I didn't notice the difference.
Did you not? Anyway, mate, I guess one of the things that would be quite nice to have a little chat about was leadership. Both of us have been in positions of leadership for various reasons over the years, whether that's in forces, whether that's in teaching, wherever it might have been. And what are your impressions? That's what I'm interested in. What are your impressions of leadership over the years? What have you seen? What's been good? What's been bad? Without naming names, without going into details, this isn't about pinning people to a cross.
Damn.
Sorry, mate.
No.
You're going to have to go back and rewrite your script.
I know. I'm so glad you chose this subject, because when you stated it and I started making notes, I knew I'd be interested, but I didn't realise how passionate I'd be about it. What can I say? Is half an hour long enough? That's what I fear. And I may go off on one, so you may have to put your hand up and say stop. Anyway, here's your answer. So many leaders, so little leadership. I mean, you think about it, there are tens of thousands of courses and books that exist on leadership because it's important and people crave it. Why then is leadership generally a curse? If you read some of the literature, in my own opinion, and I'm not saying it's a correct one, but in my opinion, it's either too aggressive and corporate or it's too vague and buzzwordy. So, for instance, just take the throwaway comment, have a positive attitude. Or to what? Because in my experience, most leaders are positive towards themselves and no one else. What about society? It doesn't often say, and also it can be very academic. So you get talk recently about how leadership is coupled with followership, the difference between managing and coaching. Leadership obviously is not managing, etc., etc. So yes, it's very important. I've yet to come across something that would kind of share my own personal passion and interest in what leadership is. So unfortunately, I come from a slightly skewed angle, and I wouldn't say disappointed, but I would have liked in my 40-odd years of work to have come across more people I called good leaders. What about you?
Oh, mate, as you've been talking, I've got little notes up on my screen and I'm just sort of ticking them off and going, well, yeah, that covers that point, that point, that point. You know, it's interesting point that you made that people crave leadership. And I'm not so sure that people crave leadership in as much as they crave position and authority and power. People crave having a title attached to them. I am the boss. I am the head honcho. And there's almost, from what I've seen over the years, there's almost been like an expectation that people who step into positions of authority suddenly think that then empowers them to be leaders, and that what they then say is going to be followed. And I don't think it works that way at all. My observations over the years is that there's an absolute dearth of leadership. There are lots and lots of books, as you've said out there. There's lots and lots of processes and practices that people should be putting in place in terms of leadership. Lots of great buzzwords, and you just touched on that. Positive sort of self-promotion is what a lot of it seems to be, and I would call that sort of empire building rather than service. So my personal view of leadership is that, first of all, it's a privilege. You are in a very, very privileged position if you are placed in a position of leadership. And with that position of privilege comes a huge responsibility for you to serve. And your job is to serve your people that you are due to lead. So I have a sort of upside down view of what leadership is. Servant leadership is, it's very altruistic. My job as a leader over the years has been to empower my people, so that those people can rise up. That's it.
Yeah.
My job has not been to build my empire. My job has not been to agree with my bosses, which is probably why I find myself in my position, not to agree with my bosses, but to push back and say, no, this is not the way that we need to be looking at this, because this is going to affect our people in a negative way. So I think that what we have in some of our organizations is we have an absolute dearth of leadership. We have lots of managers, systems and processes, but we don't have leaders, people who can actually get their teams to get out the trenches. You know, I've looked around over the years, last couple of years particularly, leadership above me has been woeful, in my view, woeful. Not in every area, but in my direct area has been woeful. Prior to that, I had some very solid, good leaders who I would have got out the trenches for and run across no man's land for. You know, those people have been fantastic, but there are others who come in and you think, oh my goodness, what a disaster this is. Because you're not interested in people, you're not interested in empowering your people. All you're interested in is build your empire, make yourself look good. And I don't go with that, I'm afraid. So that's what I've seen over recent years.
There's a Dutchman, he's an inspirational speaker, he's called Alexander Den Heer, and he has a quote. He said, "When I talk to managers, I get the feeling that they are important, but when I talk to leaders, I get the feeling that I am important." In my time in the Navy, publishing, at uni, and in teaching, I possibly could say I've known 3 people who I would consider great leaders. And that's a terrible percentage over the years, isn't it? One was in the Navy, a navigation officer, always humble, always polite, would always say thank you. He had no sense of superiority. He was helpful, and he would even go out of his way to make a conversation. It was just, compared to all the others around him, he just stood out. The second one would be when I was in publishing. It was a soon-to-retire publisher who was very encouraging and coaching. He never told. It was all show, you don't tell. And the third is, you can probably guess what I'm referring to now, is a nurse who, when she was dealing with a patient in distress, she was calm, polite, encouraging, reassuring, positive, approachable, had lots of empathy, was willing to do the dirty jobs without any recognition, but also made difficult decisions. So what did all 3 of them have in common? Well, they were all competent and they all cared. They all had respect.
Yeah. And I think a good leader actually does care. They care about their people, and the people know that they care. There is absolutely no doubt in the people's mind that this is a really engaged personality. This is somebody who knows a little bit about me, wants to know a little bit about me. This is somebody who actually does care whether I'm here, whether I'm not, whether I turn up, whether I don't, and is really happy to support me and walk alongside me. And I think that a team notice that. They really notice, and they notice when it's not there. Much like yourself, for over 40 years, I could count good leaders on the fingers of one hand over 40 years. And that is absolutely disgraceful. Probably the first one that I came across was on the Cherry B, HMS Charybdis, who was my divisional officer at the time. So I won't name him. And I was only 16. And so this was the first sort of time that I'd really come across somebody in a position of authority other than outside of school. And he told me that I had to go and do a particular job. And I looked at him. Now, I'm 16, and this is a long time ago now, and you don't do this sort of thing because you would have got shot, tied to the mast or keel hauled or something like that. But he told me to do this particular job, and I said, "No, I'm not doing that, sir." And he just looked at me. And now, bearing in mind that this is a commissioned officer telling a 16-year-old little junior rating to go and do a job. Now, he could have gone, "Just get on with it, Jack," and no complaints. But he looked at me and he said, "Why aren't you going to do that then?" And I said, "Because it's disgusting. It's a disgusting, horrible job, and I'm not doing it." And he said, and I've never forgotten this. Say 16, big impression. He said, let me just tell you something, Hut. I will never ask you to do something that I have not done or would not be willing to do myself."
Yeah.
And I looked at him as a young 16-year-old, and I thought, I actually believe you. I believe what you've just said there. And so I went, "Okay, sir, I'll get on and do it." And so I cracked on and did it. And the reality was that showed something really important, I think, in my thinking in terms of what leadership was. You don't just follow somebody because they are in a position of authority higher than you. I've never respected that. I just haven't. But I have always respected somebody who would say, "Yep, I understand what you're saying. Now, here's why we're doing it. So here's the explanation," or "I won't ask you to do it if I haven't done it, or I wouldn't be willing to do it." So leading by example has been one of the biggest things for me over the years. And you can probably just see to my right shoulder, there's a little plaque on the wall here, which was presented to me by one of the teams that I ran. And they had that made for me. And under the titles and all the rest of it, there's a little quote, and it says, "In recognition of your unwavering leadership, where some sought power, you sought to empower." I was really touched with that because that has probably defined my style of leadership. I've never sought to cling to power. I've been really fortunate to have been able to move up in terms of rank or structure or hierarchy, but I've never sought it. But what I have always sought to do is to empower people. And that came from that divisional officer when I was a 16-year-old. And that was sown in me at such an early age. So all the way through a rank system, I've always looked at the rank as gone, yeah, okay, I've got the rank, but I've now got to use that to lift other people.
That's right.
It's interesting you said you didn't seek power. Thomas Sowell is an economist. He's credited as saying that, and I actually very much appreciate this. He said, people who enjoy meetings should not be in charge of anything. So many leaders, they get this power and then think, I'm in control. So I'm going to call a meeting. Everybody's got to come in, and regardless of whether you're busy, you're going to sit at the desk, you're going to be quiet, and you're going to listen to me talk. And I've left these meetings thinking, what was that about? And it was all to project authority. Or could you tell us where we're going, direction of the company perhaps? No, 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 you don't need to know. As though power is through knowledge, but you don't talk to plebs below you. And also, it's amazing how many bad leaders don't encourage any feedback. They do not allow people to make mistakes. They'll say, you've made a mistake and you've cost us and all that. It was only when I went to university or started reading Plato when the old famous saying, know thyself. The wise person is the person who knows they know nothing. I am wise because I have experience because I am unwise. So many bad leaders think, well, I'm in this position, therefore I must know everything, even though I've not been trained and got experience in it, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you'll do it because I'm in charge. And that is so common and so soul-destroying.
It really is. I remember working with a chap some years ago, and we were doing a particular recruitment round, and we had got some very, very good applicants in for this particular job. It wasn't an entry-level job, it was a professional level role that they were looking to perform. I'd gone through and I'd sort of flagged people up, because one of the things that I'm quite good at doing is actually recruiting and building teams. I'm pretty good at selecting people right for the role. And I said to my offsider, what about this individual? And he went, oh, no, I'm not going to pick him. And I said, why? Why wouldn't you bring this guy up for interview? He's stunning. He's got a fantastic CV and his background is absolutely brilliant. And he said to me, I couldn't possibly have him on my team because he's way more qualified than me. And I looked at him and said, mate, we need to have a chat. What you want on your team is people who are way more qualified than you, because what you want to be building is the best possible team. So bring people in who are brilliant. Bring people in who are much better than you. Bring people in who are going to galvanize your team, because guess whose team it is? It's your team. You want the best people on it, because when your team do well, they're going to go, oh, that's Steve's team or that's Mark's team. And you're going to get the kudos for having super smart people working for you. So you shouldn't never be frightened of that. You should be embracing that and looking for the best possible people, which is why I have issues around recruiting to other aspects. We should be recruiting to merit. We should be looking to bring the best possible, irrespective of who they are, irrespective of what colour they are, irrespective of anything else. Recruit to merit and build the strongest, best team you can. And you find that when you do that, you get all of the rest thrown in. That's been the way I've done it over the years anyway.
And it actually brings up quicker than I thought it would come up, is that if you was to say, all right then, why do we have so many poor leaders? And I think it actually starts with the CV and the interview process. Because if you think of the curriculum vitae, the resume, it forces people to possibly fudge the truth. Secondly, it causes people to put forward what they consider to be positive corporate virtues if it's in the corporate world. But that tends to be quite aggressive, and it promotes narcissism. It promotes people with the characteristics that suit an aggressive male. And isn't it strange that most CEOs in the corporate world especially, and I can't talk about your side, Steve, the police side, I'm talking about my own experience, but they all tend to be 6-foot males who are white, who want authority. And they will push forward through the interview process certain skills that the people above them don't see as a threat, but will complement them in the greasy ladder. We're going to keep you down until we decide to bring you up, and we'll only bring you up if basically you agree with me. You get the job because you agree with the person who's interviewing you, not because you're the best person or the best woman or man for the job. It's probably why a lot of CEOs in a 2014 survey are sociopaths. And they are in those positions because they seem to have the charismatic attitudes of what is considered to be a good leader, but is in fact toxic.
Yeah, I have seen and been the recipient of toxic leadership over recent years. I have seen how recruitment panels work, and I have seen how people are discarded at various recruitment panels because that person could be a threat to the individual above them. And it seems to me that what we do get is we get a lot of recruit like for like. So as you've just said, if you agree with the person that's interviewing you in terms of, oh yeah, that person will not ruffle any feathers, they're going to sit there, they're going to agree with me, they're just going to empower me. It just goes back to what I've said, Mark. That is not the way to build teams. That is not the way to lead people. I have always looked for people when I've recruited them to come onto my teams who've got a bit of spark in them. and I would throw curvy old balls at them to try and get them to give me non-PC type of response, or to just see how they respond to a non-PC type of question. And other people on the panel would just have their heads in their hands thinking, oh my goodness, you can't ask that question. And I think, no, I want to see how they react. I want to see how they respond. I want to see what their spark is. And I'd much rather have people that would push back at me. I had one young Indian girl who was working with me, and I recruited her, and she was sparky in the interview, and it was great because I'd ask her a question. She said, well, I don't think so. And she'd sort of fold her arms and she'd look at me, so I don't agree with you. I don't think that's right. And I don't think this is right. And I'd say, why don't you think that then? Come on, articulate it to me. And she would. And I'd look at her and I'd think, yeah, you've got a bit of spark, girl. I like you. I'm going to have you on my team. And she was fantastic. And when she left, she said, I am so pleased to have been part of this team. I was so pleased to have spent my time sort of cutting my teeth on this type of work, and to have worked with the people that you recruited around. You said they're just fantastic. But they were all different. Every single one of them was different. Everyone brings a different strength. And I think that there are people in senior levels of leadership who are frightened to have somebody who is a bit different, somebody who's not quite coming at it from the same angle. Whereas I would look at it as just another facet of a gem. We're all looking at different facets. And we need to make sure that we get all of these different people at different angles coming in to give the best possible thing. Now, most of my work has been public service. And the key for me about somebody who's in public service is that your role is to serve the public. You are there to serve the public. You are not there to self-serve. So get your fat snout out of the trough and actually serve the public. And I find that there have been too many people over recent years who are just interested in getting their fat snout into a trough and not serving the public because it's not of interest to them. Which goes to the point that you made earlier. If you want to be something, you should probably never be allowed to be it. Anybody who wants to be a politician should be banned instantly because you're not the right person to be a politician. I'm making a blunt statement, but you know what I mean. Some people who have a desire for power and authority and all the rest of it, nightmare.
No, I agree. A leader shouldn't try to become a leader if it means that they want power over others. They must also be humble and admit their failings, that they don't know everything. They must encourage accountability in themselves. One of the biggest mistakes I think leaders make and people in position is that when it comes to, for instance, an appraisal, isn't it amazing that it's always a one-way street? It's always like the person above appraising the person below, but never allowing any feedback on their own performance. Because it's almost as though they don't want to be questioned. For some reason, they believe their authority makes them immune to criticism from below. It's quite upsetting when you consider the amount of people who are in positions of power. They're not their authentic self. They come to work with this mask, this image that often doesn't seem comfortable for themselves to have. They got to perform or something, or they got to put on this aggressive nature. In my own experience, I've had far too many people in leadership positions who will never take any fault for any mistakes. They'll blame others, but if it's a success, it was down to them, which is appalling. And it's always me, not we. How often do you come across a leader who never seems to leave their office? They're conspicuous by their absence. And if they do come out, it's to bollock somebody. I don't know, it's almost like they're on show on procession and they must have people kowtowing to him. It's very bizarre.
It really is. I can remember covering for somebody in the capital when they were away, and I was sat at a desk and I'm typing away, and then all of a sudden this little instant message pops up on my screen on a Teams link type of instant messenger type message, and it's from the girl who sat behind me, and she says, "Can I talk to you?" I mean, we're talking a metre apart. She's about a metre behind me, and so I spun the chair round and tapped her on the shoulder and said, "What's the problem? Why have you sent me that?" And she says, "Oh, I didn't want to trouble you." I said, "What do you mean you didn't want to trouble me?" She said, "Oh, well, when so-and-so's here, he's told us that he's so busy and so engaged with what he's doing that we're not to disturb him. And so we have to send him a message so that he can see it on the screen. Then he'll come to us when he's ready." And I said, "Right, let's get a few things straight here." I said, "That's not my style. I'm sat a metre away from you. If you want me to talk to me, just spin around and say, 'Hey, Steve, have you got a moment?' If I'm busy, I'll turn and say, yeah, just give me 2 seconds and I'll be with you." I said, "But this is not the way we're going to do business over the next few months. So let's start properly." As I say, your position as a leader is such a privilege. It is such a privilege. I count the teams that I've led over probably the last 10, 12 years, particularly, maybe the last 20 years, maybe. I've been so privileged to leave such great men and women over the years. And it has been an honour to be able to do that. You know, you're talking about the performance reviews and things like that when you sit down and the boss gives you the spiel about what you've not done and what you haven't done right or what you've done right and all the rest of it. One of the things that I always used to say in my performance reviews to my teams was I'd talk them through bits and pieces, and you'd hit on all of that other stuff. And then I'd say to them, right, so what could I have done better for you?
Yeah.
And they'd go, sorry? I said, what could I have done better for you? How could I have served you better? How could I have improved where you're looking to go in your career? How could I have helped you? How could I have built you up? And they go, oh, I'm not used to being asked that. And I say, well, you should be being asked that by your boss. They would say, oh, well, I'd like to do this or this or this. What do you think? And I say, absolutely. Let's see if we can build that in for next year. Let's see if we can get you to grow into that. And I've had huge success with that to the point where the teams that I looked after had the lowest attrition rate across the whole of the work that I used to do. Not because of me because I'm wonderful, but because I recruited good people who knew where they were valued. And if you come to work and you know that you've got the boss has got trust in you, that's fantastic. There's no fear of conflict. I mean, I've got 5 dysfunctional things, 5 things that will flow out of a dysfunctional team: lack of trust, fear of conflict, low commitment, no accountability, and inattention to results. But if you actually build a team that counters all of those aspects, so you trust your team, you empower your team, you enable your team to come and talk to you so that there's no conflict going on vertically or indeed horizontally. So if you have a spat with your mate, get them in the room, say, right, what's the deal, guys? Let's sort this out. Build into that sense of commitment. Build into the fact that you're doing something of value, that there's meaning to it, there's purpose to it. And also, the accountability side. Make sure that people know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that there is a process which we follow, which then has an outcome, which we have to be accountable for, because then we're going to get the results that we need. As I say, for me, it's been a huge privilege, leadership, and I am incredibly disappointed about what I've seen with so many people over the years. But there we go.
And I could not have said it better. And in fact, I've got a list here, and you've said all the things I wanted to say as well. You got in there first. Well done. Fantastic. I'll just finish off by saying that I think leadership is not tied to status or wealth, intellect or charisma or confidence. Too many people bludgeon their way to the top by putting across this form of confidence, which is just appalling. For me, a great leader could be a very shy janitor with low pay and average grades. And perhaps a profoundly great leader can only be that kind of person, because they're not seeking to lord themselves, or lady themselves if it's a female, over others. And that's what I think is a good leader.
I agree with you. I think that leadership is about serving. That a leader who is moving into a position of leadership because they want to fulfill their own ambitious plans of domination, that just leads to tyranny. But a leader who moves into a position of leadership in order to empower the people, to raise people up, that's what you want. That's what you want.
One day, Steve, I look forward to seeing you in politics.
I very much doubt it.
Right, take care, mate.
Take care later. Bye.